but those aren't exactly available in the air. The APU would be at times, but not in all cases. There are two types of in-flight starts: windmill start and crossbleed start. In-flight starts may only be performed within a specific altitude and airspeed flight envelope. For the most part, in-flight starts may only be performed at or below 27,000-foot pressure altitude. In a windmill start, the N1 fan behaves like a windmill and spins as the aircraft moves through the air. The 24 fan blades on the 737NG are very aerodynamic. This method does not use bleed pneumatic power, therefore it doesn't use the engine starter. Instead, it takes advantage of the air that is rushed into the windmilling engine to turn the compressors and get the engine restarted. In this case, the engine start switches must be placed in the flight position, where both spark igniters operate continuously. Oil quantity indications may be as low as 0 during a windmilling start because of the lack of compressed air to allow the oil to return easily to the oil tanks. When the aircraft is out of the flight envelope for a windmill start, or when the engine has been shut down for more than 1 hour, a crossbleed start must be performed. This method does use the engine starter, therefore the engine start switch must be placed in the ground position. Neither form of in-flight starting has electronic engine control protection mechanisms. During the rest of the flight, operating the engines is pretty straightforward. For the most part, the autothrust system handles the thrust that each engine produces to match the required flight speed that is programmed into the flight management computers. This, of course, varies according to many weather parameters, company fuel burn policies, and the respective flight phase. When the aircraft is bound to touchdown during the landing phase, the engines are placed into idle thrust. However, there is still some sort of forward pushing moment that the engines generate, which is in the order of 20 to 30% N1. This is not favorable to slow the airplane down to a safe taxi speed. Therefore, the pilots engage the so-called thrust reversers. The thrust reversers essentially change the direction of engine exhaust air to help decrease airspeed after a landing or during a rejected takeoff. Usage of thrust reversers is also beneficial to the gear and brakes, as lesser wheel braking action is required to stop the aircraft in the same distance. Each engine has one thrust reverser with two halves, or sleeves. Reverser sleeves move together with the help of hydraulic power. As the sleeves move aft, a blocker door changes the direction of airflow and produces the reverse thrust. Each reverser sleeve opens to about 45 degrees of the stowed position. Thrust reversers are operated hydraulically. Hydraulic system A pressure operates the engine number 1 thrust reverser, and hydraulic system B pressure operates the engine number 2 thrust reverser. If either hydraulic system fails, the standby hydraulic system powers thrust reverser deployment. When the standby system is used, thrust reverser deployment takes considerably longer time, and asymmetric reverse thrust may be observed. The first sign of asymmetric reverse thrust is an aircraft tendency to yaw and turn into the direction where there is higher reverse thrust. For example, if the right engine reverse thrust system is working normally and the left engine reverse thrust system is working at a lower capacity, the aircraft will tend to yaw and turn towards the right. Under normal conditions, synchronization shafts make sure that both reversers are actuated simultaneously. Thrust reversers are operated with the thrust reverser lever, located immediately forward of the engine normal thrust levers. The reverse thrust levers have to be lifted aft to deploy reverse thrust. The reverse thrust levers have 3 detents. Detent 1, idle reverse thrust. Detent 2, normal operating reverse thrust. Detent 3, maximum reverse thrust. Only two detents, maximum and idle, are selectable in your PMDG 737 NGX, as opposed to its real-world counterpart that has the normal detent in addition. When the reverser sleeves move from their stowed position, a cockpit amber reverse alert illuminates. When the reverser fully reaches its deployed position, the reverse alert turns green and the reverse thrust lever can be pulled aft of the idle reverse thrust detent. In this condition, normal operating reverse thrust is provided and is sufficiently powerful to bring the aircraft to a stop. When added reverse thrust is needed for short, hot, or wet runways, the reverse thrust lever may be moved fully aft to the maximum reverse position. There is also a reverser light in the aft overhead panel that illuminates when the reverser has been commanded to stow. This light extinguishes roughly 10 seconds after stowage. If the light does not extinguish for 12 seconds or more, a malfunction will have taken place and a master caution will present itself. In either reverse thrust setting, it is not recommended to allow the aircraft to decelerate below 60 knots with the reversers deployed, because of the risk of foreign objects injecting themselves into the engine cowling and damaging components. To provide system protection in the case of thrust reverser uncommanded motion or incomplete stowage, an auto restow system compares actual reverser position versus the commanded position and stows both thrust reversers back to their fully closed position. Shutdown procedures on the 737 NG engines are as simple as pulling the engine start lever from the idle to the cutoff position. This will close the fuel spar shutoff valve, de-energize the engine starter, and isolate fuel from the related engine. The engine indicator instruments must be monitored for a normal reduction in all engine parameters. Engines and their components may be a difficult chapter to grasp at first. However, it's essential to achieve a good understanding of their operation, as they are critical to the safe handling of not just the 737, but all aircraft, except gliders. During this lesson, we discussed many things. We saw how engines work, how they are ignited, and how the fuel and oil systems work. Thrust reversers were also discussed. It's fundamental to know that for an airline to start a scheduled service to a specific airport and runway, the aircraft must be able to demonstrate that it will be able to brake satisfactorily without the use of the reverse thrust system, as this is only an extra aid that's available to reduce the landing distance roll and tire wear and tear. We also discussed some of the cockpit indications associated to the engine system. A lot of these will be profoundly discussed during other sections of the 737 NGX training. We only mentioned a few of the engine protection mechanisms and abnormal conditions, especially those related to the EEC and thrust reversers. We encourage you to investigate about abnormal engine conditions and comment on their procedures in the comments section of this video. This lesson covered the following topics: 737 NG Engine System Overview, Engine Fuel System Overview, Engine Oil System, Starting and Ignition Procedures, Thrust Reversers, and a lesson summary. Next, we'll have a lesson on the APU. Until then, throttle on.